Soon the toils of life will cease, and no sorrow we shall know. In that home of the soul, there will dwell in joy and peace, robed in garments white as snow. In that home of the soul, blessed Lord, there's you.
We're in Hebrews, the 7th chapter. Hebrews, the 7th chapter, if you want to be turning there. In this particular chapter, the entirety of the chapter, the writer is talking about the priesthood of Melchizedek. The priesthood of Melchizedek. When is the first time that we ever read of Melchizedek? Okay, in the book of Genesis, very early on in the book of Genesis, chapter 14, and he comes in contact with the patriarch Abraham, doesn't he? And there are two very interesting things that happen when Melchizedek and Abraham come in contact with one another. What are they? Number one, Melchizedek blesses Abraham. Why is that important? Okay, yes. It shows that Melchizedek was of more importance, of greater superiority than Abraham. Now, was Abraham an important figure among the Jews? Oh, yes. In fact, he is referred to as their father, isn't he? And so when you talk about an individual being better than Abraham, you're talking about something pretty superior. Okay? So there's the first thing that happens. Melchizedek blesses Abraham. And what is the second huge thing that transpired? Ah, yes. Abraham pays tithes to Melchizedek. What's so important about that? Okay. Is that all it is? Is that he just recognized him as a priest and so he pays tithes? Yes, guys, it's a reaffirmation of the lesser and the greater, isn't it? The lesser, Abraham, pays tithes to the greater, Melchizedek. Okay, so there are two confirmations that Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. Okay, now, were there some other interesting things about this man named Melchizedek that the writer of Hebrews addresses? Okay, he was the king of Salem, wasn't he? And Salem was probably what city? Jerusalem. Okay, so he's the king of Jerusalem. And anything else? Oh yes, he was without father and without mother. Meaning that he doesn't have a beginning. Okay, there's no record of his beginning. He just pops onto the scene as if he has always existed, right? What's another interesting thing about him? Okay, he was not of the tribe of Levi and yet was a priest. That's interesting, isn't it? So here we have this priesthood that is in existence, but it is not a Levitical priesthood. Okay, anything else about it? We don't read of his death, do we? Not only does he not have a beginning, he does not have an ending, right? Now guys, if you don't have a beginning and you don't have an ending and yet you exist, that means you are eternal. Okay? You have always been. And that's what makes Melchizedek so interesting. Okay? And he just pops onto the scene. Now, the writer goes through all of that information in the first 4 verses of Hebrews 7, and we studied that last week. Okay? Now what he's going to do, he's going to take that information and he is going to focus in especially on the tithe. Okay? And He's going to start making some spiritual application to the new covenant. Okay? And to us. And to Jesus Christ. Okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about in this particular section. The application of this Old Testament priesthood. Okay? Look, we're going to start by talking about the tithes and the descent. Okay, the tithes and the descent. Notice what he says in verse 5. And verily they that are the sons of Levi, who receive the office of priesthood, have a commandment. Now watch what this commandment is. To take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they came out of the loins of Abraham. Wow. Let's just stop for a couple of minutes and let's just talk about the Levites and remind ourselves again of who they are and their importance. Who are the Levites? Okay, yes. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, then Judah. He was the third-born son of Leah. Okay? And the third-born son of Jacob. All right? So he is one of the 12. And his descendants became a part of the nation of Israel, didn't they? Okay, so very important group of individuals. They enter into the land of Canaan, and what does God do with the land and with the children of Israel? Yeah, He divides it all up, doesn't He? And so every tribe receives a parcel of land. Oh, see, you're supposed to say false. Okay. But he's right, except Levi. Folks, Levi did not receive a parcel of land. And yet there's still 12 parcels. Isn't that interesting? Okay, now there's 12 sons, right? You take Levi out, that leaves how many? 11. And yet, when you count the parcels of land in Israel, there's 12. Explain that. That's a Ricky Ricardo. Explain it. How do you explain it? Yes. Joseph's sons. Who were they? Ephraim and Manasseh. Those two sons were given parcels of land, weren't they? But you still have the Levites who get no land because they are what? Priests of God. Turn over in your Bibles to Numbers chapter 3. Numbers chapter 3. Beginning at verse 5. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Bring the tribe of Levi near, and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may minister unto him. Okay? Guys, you kind of have to keep true or false. Aaron is of the Levitical tribe. He is. Okay? He's a high priest, but his is a very special lineage, is it not? His is a very chosen lineage of the tribe of Levi, in that his lineage is supposed to carry on what? The high priesthood. Then you have the rest of the Levites who surround him, who are the ministers to the high priest. Okay, very important distinction. Now notice what he says. And they shall keep his charge, and the charge of the whole congregation before the tabernacle of the congregation, to do the service of the tabernacle. And guys, you go back and you read about these Levites, and each, there's three main groups of them, aren't there? And each one of them are given certain detail with regard to the tabernacle and what's supposed to be done. And they're on a rotating service, aren't they? You serve X amount of time, and then another group comes on board. And X amount of time, and another group comes on board. Okay? And was that a pretty wicked detail when they were traveling in the wilderness? Why? Why did they have to carry it? Okay? But why would it be so hard? Okay? In the wilderness, who's leading them? God. How is He leading them? Yeah, a pillar of a cloud by day, pillar of a flame at night, and who makes the decisions when they go and stop? God does. Okay? So all of a sudden, you get up in the morning, and all of a sudden the pillar of the cloud starts to move, and guess what everybody says? Oh no, we got to go. So guess what you got to do? You got to pack up that whole tabernacle and get it ready to what? Ready to travel. God travels 24 hours and He stops. And He says, we're going to be here for a little while. What do you have to do? You got to set that tabernacle all up again. And guys, that tabernacle was extremely detailed, was it not? And it had to be handled and carried in certain ways. There was just a lot that had to be done to it. So you stay there a week, 2 weeks, and all of a sudden God says what? Here we go. Oh, can't we stay another day or two? Man. And so during that 40-year period, the Levites had a massive job on their hands, didn't they? Okay. Finally, they enter into the land of promise, and what city becomes the place where the tabernacle is located? Shiloh. And that's what we're talking about in 1 Samuel, isn't it? Okay, Shiloh. And eventually, the tabernacle is brought to Jerusalem. Finally, the tabernacle is done away, and the temple is put in the place of the tabernacle, isn't it? Okay, so don't you know the priests who were serving in the tabernacle, as they look back upon the Levites who carried that thing through the wilderness, they say, I'm glad I didn't live way back there. You know, it's kind of like us today, you know. I'm glad I didn't live in the 20s, 30s, and 40s growing up. Okay, have to build a fire in the church and all that kind of stuff. But that's what the Levites did, and they were specially chosen. Now, again, they didn't have what? They didn't have any land in Canaan. What did you say a while ago? Except for what? 48 Levitical cities scattered through the entirety of the land of Canaan. Okay? So there were 48 cities. Each tribe gave X amount of cities to the Levites, and that's where they lived, guys. That was their cities. They had the city, and they had so much land outside the city where their animals could graze and where they could raise crops and things of that nature. 48 cities, but no one designated parcel. So they have cities, and God says, you also are going to be required to pay these men what? A tithe. We find that in Numbers chapter 3, beginning at verse 5. I'm sorry, Deuteronomy 14, beginning at 27. And the Levite, which is within thy gate, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part, nor inheritance with thee. At the end of 3 years thou shalt bring for them the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. And the Levites, because he hath no part, and no inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come, and shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee, and all the work of thy hand which thou doest. Now remember, there's a principle. If the children of Israel are to pay tithes to the Levites, what does that say to the Levites? I mean, to the children of Israel. The Levites are of more importance, more significance than who? The other tribes. Right? The less always pays tithes to the what? To the greater. Now folks, the reason we bring this up is because we want you to understand that Israel already understood this principle. Okay? This was something they had been doing ever since the law was given. Okay? Ever since there was the tribe of Levi. They were paying tithes to the Levites, and they knew that the Levites are the more significant tribe. They are the priestly tribe. Now, it's interesting as to why God gave the Levites to the children of Israel. Okay? Who did they represent? Yes. Now, what God could have done, He could have said, every firstborn son has to become a priest. Right? And so you would have had to keep up with every birth, and that child would have to be raised, have to get him to the temple, to the tabernacle, to wherever, so that he could serve as what? As a priest. God said, I'm not doing that. Okay? We're not going to put that kind of confusion on you. So rather than requiring the firstborn, He says, oh no, I'm going to choose one tribe, Levi, and they will represent who? All of the firstborn. Okay? Did they count how many Levites there were? Yes. Did they count how many firstborn children there were? Yes. Were there an identical number originally? No, there were not. There were fewer Levites than firstborn. So guess what the children of Israel had to do? Cough up some cash in order to make up the difference between the numbers originally, okay, when they were first establishing the Levitical priesthood, okay, it's to make everything even. And so all that transpired. Notice also the payment of the tithes proved that Levi was superior to the others. So they represent who? The firstborn. That means they're important. Firstborn children were what? Extremely important, weren't they? They were always looked upon as the superior ones. So now you got this whole tribe representing the firstborn. So they're superior in that way. And you have to pay what? Tithes to these people, so that reinforces that they are what? Superior, folks. This idea of superiority is not something that is unusual among the nation of Israel. Now note what happens, okay? There's tithes and descent, right? Okay, first the tithes are given to who? Levi. Now watch this, tithes to a king. But he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes of Abraham. Uh-oh. A while ago it was Israel paying tithes to Israelites, right? We get that. Okay? Now we've got Abraham paying tithes to a king who is not of Jewish descent. Uh-oh. This is getting kind of wicked, isn't it? Guys, did the Jews look upon themselves as a pretty special people? Oh yeah. We're the people of God, right? We're the covenant people. We're the chosen ones. And now we've got their father, Abraham, paying tithes to a king who is not of Jewish descent. Wow. Very, very unique and unusual. Okay? Very, very interesting. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Notice Melchizedek had no fleshly relationship to Abraham at all. He had no legal right, therefore, to demand tithes of Abraham, yet he received tithes of Abraham. Folks, Abraham is telling the children of Israel what? What's he telling them? That's right. You see this king, Melchizedek? You see this priest, Melchizedek? He is superior to me, even though he's not a what? A Jew. Now, you let a Jew try to wrap their brain around that. Okay? That's pretty tough. Okay? But that's exactly what he's trying to get across to these individuals. It was Abraham who recognized Melchizedek's superiority and acknowledged that in giving him tithes. Let me ask you something. You think it might have been tough for a Jew to embrace Christianity? Guys, you see, we don't think about it sometimes. How we think about it, it ought to have been easy, and there are some areas wherein it should have been a simple process, right? They should have recognized Jesus. They should have understood the prophecies and accepted Jesus when He fulfilled the prophecies. But there's some things that, guess what? This mindset that they are now having to grasp is tough, right? Our king is not a human, he's the Son of God. Our kingdom is not an earthly kingdom, it's a spiritual kingdom. Our priesthood is no longer the Melchizedekian priesthood. It is no longer after the order of Melchizedek. It's after this guy who is not even a Jew from way back there in the days of Abraham when Abraham paid tithes to him. This is some hard stuff that a Jew has to understand. Now notice verse 7b through 8, because now he confirms again what we've already talked about in the previous lesson. Not only is he recognized his superiority once, he recognizes that superiority what? Twice. So he's a twice-noted king. And blessed him that had the promises. Okay, Melchizedek blessed who? Abraham, who had the promises. And without contradiction, he affirms this again, without contradiction, the less is what? Blessed of the better. Now guys, keep it in mind. He is really trying to hammer this home to these Jews. Guys, the Melchizedekian priesthood is what? Superior to the Levitical priesthood. And I can prove that by 2 points. This man blessed Abraham, and Abraham paid tithes to him. Notice he says without contradiction, without gainsaying, without dispute, without opposition, without rebellion. Guys, what he's saying is, when you look at this illustration and you see what's happened, guess what? You as a Jew cannot argue against it. You have to accept it. It's a fact. Isn't that interesting? There are actually facts in religion. You know? It's unbelievable. People don't think that anymore, do they? They think they can just think however they want to think and accept whatever they want to accept. And guess what? That's not true. There are facts in religion, and this is one of them. Melchizedek's better than Abraham. Whew, that's a mouthful. Jim? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You know, he is not of what? Abraham's descent. Yeah. See, this priesthood is what? This priesthood is not just a Jewish priesthood. It is a what? It is an all-person priesthood, isn't it? It's open to all individuals. And so, yeah, he doesn't just come out and say that, but that's the indication that this priesthood is for all. Okay? Notice what Brother Waycaster says. The author expresses here a sort of axiomatic truth, a truth which is so generally acknowledged that it is really beyond what? Dispute. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. That's beyond dispute. Without contradiction, baptism is essential to salvation. Can we say that? Yeah. Just as much as the writer here could say this of Melchizedek and his priesthood. Now notice what else. He now goes to one more point to show the superiority of guess who? Of Melchizedek. Okay? Tithes and death. Look what he says. Hebrews 7 verse 8. And here, men that die receive what? Tithes. Oh, men that die receive tithes. The author sets forth a third argument to show Melchizedek's superiority. An argument based upon the fact that unlike the Levitical priesthood, Melchizedek never had to pass his authority to someone else. Because we never read that Melchizedek ever what? Died. Wow. The children of Israel pay tithes to priests who die. Abraham, the father of the Levitical priesthood, paid tithes to a priest who never died. Now who's superior? A dead man or a live man? Folks, his argument is easy, isn't it? Notice point C there. There was a huge difference with regard to their deaths. The Levites were men that died. Aaron died at the age of 123 years. Just prior to his death, he passed the authority to his priesthood on to his sons Eleazar. Okay? But as far as Melchizedek is concerned, notice what he says. The priest that died not, but there he receiveth them of whom it is witness that he what? Liveth. He never what? He never died. Wow. Melchizedek is a priest who did not die and passed his authority on to another person. Now, we talked about this last time, didn't we? And I'm going to emphasize it again to you with Brother Waycaster's quote here. Keep in mind that so far as the witness of the Scripture is concerned, Melchizedek did not what? Die. And consequently, there was no successor of his priesthood. Okay? I'm going to state my opinion one more time. Okay? And then we'll leave it alone. I believe Melchizedek was just a man. Okay? Just a man. He was what? A real king. And he was a real what? A real priest. He was born and he what? And he died. He was just a man. But when God brings Abraham and Melchizedek together in an illustration in the Old Testament, He intentionally leaves off two things. What? His birth and death. Because He wants Melchizedek to be viewed as what? A priest like unto the Son of God. Okay? And so it's what's represented in Scripture that makes Him what? Like unto Jesus Christ. Okay? And it's that example. All we have is what is written, right? That's all we have about Abraham. That's all I can tell you. Who was his mother and father? I don't know. When did he die? I don't know. Because God what? He left all that off. Because He was using Melchizedek as what? An example. When did the priesthood of Melchizedek exist? Before the law? During the law? After the law? The Melchizedekian priesthood was in existence prior to the law. Is that a pretty important point? Yeah. Guys, was salvation by faith before the law? Oh boy, see, y'all don't want to answer that, do you? Okay? Folks, that's a huge point. Huge point. How was Abraham saved? By faith. Was he not? And he was saved by faith before what? Before the law. Does a man have to have the law of Moses in order to be saved? No. Abraham was saved without the law. You see, the Jews were so tied up in the law that they thought, you've got to have the law in order to be saved. No, you don't. Even your father Abraham didn't have the law. And yet he was justified by what? Faith. And you and I are justified by what? Faith. Without the law. It's a possibility. You see, the law is not absolutely essential for anything. See, people get so bent out of shape today when we say the law of Moses has been what? Done away. Folks, it served its purpose. It's gone. It's no longer a binding authority. And the absolute essentials for us, faith, salvation by faith, a new priesthood, having a priesthood, guess what? We don't have to have the law to have those things, do we? It's just unbelievable. Now, notice this last point, tithes and denotation. Now, what I mean by denotation is he now gets down to the heart of his argument, folks. Okay? He's hammered this point home. We've talked about it over and over and over. And now he gets down to the direct, explicit meaning in verses 9 and 10. The crux. And as man so say, Levi who receiveth tithes, Levi who receiveth tithes, pay tithes in who? Abraham. Now guys, this is where he's really getting to his argument. Who paid the tithes to Melchizedek? Who paid tithes to Melchizedek? Who paid tithes to Melchizedek? The Levites. Through who? Through Abraham. Right? That's his point right here. Okay? That not only did Abraham pay tithes, so did who? So did the Levites who came from Abraham. That's his whole argument. Okay? The writer employs here the principle of representation. Levi as represented by Abraham. When Abraham paid tithes, Levi was what? Represented by Abraham. Notice what Barnes says. It means that in circumstances of the case, the same thing occurred in regard to the superiority of Melchizedek and the inferiority of what? The whole Levitical priesthood, folks. That's his point now. Okay? Which would have occurred if Levi had been present with Abraham and had himself actually paid tithes on that occasion. The less always pays tithes to who? The better. Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. Because Levi comes from the loins of Abraham, they too paid tithes to who? Melchizedek. Folks, the Levitical priesthood is a lesser priesthood than what? Than the Melchizedekian priesthood. Okay? It's just, we got, that's his whole point. And the cause is this. For yet he was in the loins of his father when Melchizedek what? Met him. Levi didn't even have a say in this matter, did he? Okay? God has all this arranged, doesn't he? According to Hebrew tradition, a son was subject to any acts or vows made by his father so long as the son was in the loins of the father when the vow was made. Wow. When you're born, you finally get old enough, what do you ask Daddy? Daddy, what you been doing? Right? Who you been blessing, who you been paying tithes to, who you been making vows to, because you see, I'm from what? I'm from your loins, and I am bound by what? The things you have done. Okay? Folks, that relationship was very, very important. Abraham had paid tithes to Melchizedek since Levi was still in the loins of Abraham and had not been born, then Levi too paid tithes to Melchizedek, indicating his inferiority to him. Wow. Questions, comments? Jim? Absolutely. And that's the point. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and that's the whole point. He's trying to get us to think in terms of what? He's not trying to focus in on a man person. He's focusing in on what? Priesthood, isn't he? I'm contrasting two priesthoods here. I'm contrasting the Melchizedekian priesthood and the Levitical priesthood. Now remember, the Jews were about to do what? They're wanting to go back to the Levitical priesthood. You go back to Judaism, that's the priesthood you're going to. And this is the priesthood that paid tithes to who? To the Melchizedekian priesthood, the one that you're under now as what? As Christians, what are you going back there for? And that's his whole point, isn't it? Why do you go back to something that's inferior? Hasn't that been said over and over and over in this book? Prophets or Jesus, right? Who's better? Jesus, right? Moses or Jesus? Jesus. Folks, he just keeps making these contrasts over and over and over again. Don't go back to what? What's inferior. You stay with what is superior. Okay? Now, in verses 11 through 17, okay, which is, he's now going to get into the fact that Jesus and his priesthood are after the order of what? Melchizedek. Okay? And guys, he's going to be talking about some problems, some difficulties with what? That old priesthood. Notice, listen to what he says. This is verse 11. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest that should write after the order of Melchizedek, and not be called after the order of after the order of Aaron? See, the question that you ask, and we should ask any of our denominational friends, okay, is what? What priesthood are we under today? If they know anything about the Bible, you hope they'll say what? We're under the priesthood of Melchizedek, right? Why are we under this priesthood? See, that's the question. You see, there must have been something what? There must have been something weak. There must have been something wrong. There must have been something that wasn't just right under what? Under the Levitical priesthood. Because if that priesthood could do everything that this new priesthood could do, then guess what? You don't need to change it, right? Have you ever made a purchase, or have you ever thought about making a purchase, and you go look at something new, and you have something old, and you think, you know what? My old one does exactly what this new one does, and I'm not going to spend the money on that. You ever done that? I've done that. Yeah, absolutely. You know, so if perfection could have come under the Levitical priesthood, guys, we wouldn't need what? This new one. But guess what? God instituted a new one, so that tells me what? There's something interesting that I need to know about the old one. And that's what he's about to get into in verses 11 through 17 of chapter 7. Questions, comments? Nobody? Folks, one of the reasons I think Paul wrote this book is because this person who wrote this book is a master of reasoning. Was Paul well educated in the Jews' religion? Yeah. Sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He knew the law backwards and forwards. A person like Paul could sit down and the Holy Spirit, with his knowledge, could do what? Man, he could pour it on, could he not? And he could argue the points easily. Don't get it. They sure don't. Well, and a lot of folks who call themselves Christians don't what? Don't get it. Okay? They just don't get it. Jim? They can't. They can't. Let me put it, they can't right now. Yes, and the temple area has been taken over by the Muslims, and therefore we can't offer animal sacrifices. One of the points of premillennialism is that one of these days the Jews will overthrow the Muslim mosque that's there. They will rebuild the temple. All the Jewish sacrifices, the priesthood, everything will be reinstituted, and we will be set for what? The second coming of Jesus. But folks, if you're a premillennialist, until that happens, guess what? You got nothing to worry about. Jesus ain't coming. He can't come. They say, till what? Huh? If you're a Christian, a Jew. Oh, well, what they say is since the temple doesn't belong to us, we can't do it. It was kind of like they were supposed to go, when they were in exile during the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, they could not make the yearly feasts during that time, but were they still saved, even though they were, well, that's when they set up the synagogues and things of that nature. So it was a period of God's what? Yeah, of His grace, of His overlooking. What can't be done, can't be done, you know. And so, but it is kind of unique because the animal sacrifices are so important. And they know that. And if the temple were ever restored, I'd love to see what happened, wouldn't you? It's going to be a mess in Jerusalem, you know. There's going to be a lot of bleating of sheep and lowing of cattle.